Hello, my name is Christopher. I'm doing my presentation on Skinner Chapter 10, the inner world of motivation and emotion. He talks a lot about personality and separates the mind into the parts that he's already talked about in the descriptions of the literary fallacies and things of that nature, and then talks about a little bit more about what a personality is, what our motivations are in this chapter. He says the environment of the mind, so the environment we talked about the contingencies in, is based off past experiences when we go into the internal world. A personality can be best described by a set of behaviors shaped by experiences and environmental contingencies. Speaks a little bit about what the concepts of split personalities, which he goes into kind of working off of some of the abnormal behavior diagnoses like split personality disorder of that nature and schizophrenia. Split personalities or duality can mean that there are more than one set of contingencies which result in more than one repertoire of behavior. A quote is, "Genetic endowment is nothing until it has been exposed to the environment, and the exposure immediately changes it." So what he's saying in that is the origin of a personality from a behaviorist sense is that you are endowed with certain genetic components that are then shaped by the contingencies of the environment that you're exposed to. He moves into talking a little bit more of the Freud area of things, the id, the superego, and the ego. He describes basically the way that Freud described it, and then moves into the behaviorist definitions of it. The id, the base carnal portions of your brain that are susceptible to reinforcement. So they're susceptible to the desires of eating, sex, other things. And the superego would be the conscience, the interests of others, the society, limitations of parents and teachers, the rules that society sets up. So they're the contingencies of the society that you live in. So if you were to imitate society, you would decrease the amount of punishment you would experience. So therein, the ego is the balancing of these without receiving too much punishment. So if you have we're going to call it desire, and we're going to use a little bit of mentalism because that's what psychoanalysts kind of do. If you are basing the susceptible to reinforcer portions of the id, so you have the carnal desire to access some reinforcer, and then there's the social limitations of the society, which would be the rules of the school, the punishment that you would incur if you were to act on your base impulse. You want the candy of the guy next to you, you want to reach out for it, but you realize you'd be probably sent away from the classroom and you'd be embarrassed and you'd be less likely to repeat that behavior. So you'd be shaping your behavior. So then the ego would just be using those sets of experiences to base your further behaviors off of. He then talks a little bit about depth. And what psychoanalysis is really talking about when it talks about depth, and what we talk about when we're talking about it in our verbal community. So we split the psychoanalysts split consciousness and subconsciousness, and they also suggest that behaviorists can't speak to unconscious, but Skinner argues on page 169, the controlling relations between behavior and genetic and environmental variables are unconscious so long as they cannot be observed. So yeah, So he's arguing that it is solely the responsibility of behaviorists to try to define these things that are going on unconsciously and kind of make them less ambiguous. He makes sure that we don't think of the unconscious and conscious as agents that are working independently. They are just the results of the contingencies in the environment shaping our learned behavior. Okay. And talks a little bit about what expansion of the consciousness would be. Expansion of the consciousness would be being more presently aware of the stimuli that are affecting you in your present environment. So you are more aware of which components of your environment are affecting your behavior, and therein you have a deeper and more expanded understanding of your of consciousness. He just kind of makes it less ambiguous and less spacey. So he goes into trying to define the defense mechanism that Freud talks about. Explaining the need to find a release for the feelings which many responses to environmental stimuli are punished by society, and we must find a way to express them through alternative non-punished behaviors. So on page 173, I found an example that I really liked. The definition that he had in here was, at best we may say that they are ways in which person defends himself against punishment by acquiring behavior effective in the world which he lives as ego, reinforced in part because of susceptibilities to reinforcements which are part of his genetic endowment as id, and not punished by other persons or by himself as superego. I got a lot from this chapter, but one of the main questions that I wanted to ask, and I will kind of make it more clear in the comment section of my post. If we assume that we are the collection of experiences based on first our genetic components and then every experience in the environment that has shaped our behavior, are we then only limited by our sense of identity and really understanding all that? So